Picture a river, calm, wide, life-giving, the kind that has fed farms and families for generations without incident. Now picture that same river transformed in a single afternoon into a wall of water 130 meters tall, taller than a 40-story building, moving downstream at a speed nobody living below it could possibly outrun. Not a metaphor, not an exaggeration. An actual documented event dated by geologists to roughly 3,900 years ago, when a landslide dam high in the mountains of what is now China finally gave way and released 9 months of river flow in a matter of hours. At its peak, 160 Olympic swimming pools of water thundered past a single point every second, and everything downstream simply ceased to exist. Archaeologists found the proof buried in the sediment. Children crushed beneath collapsed houses, entombed under a layer of black sand that didn't belong there, sand that had traveled from one place only, the exact gorge where the dam had broken. So here's the actual question worth asking. What do you do, as a civilization, when the very thing keeping you alive, rain, rivers, seasonal flooding, is also the single most efficient killer this planet has ever produced? When the difference between a flood that feeds an entire population for a year and a flood that erases that population from the map isn't something anyone on the ground can control or predict, but is instead decided quietly, days in advance, by how much rain happened to fall in mountains nobody downstream will ever see. The answer involves a mythical king who spent 13 years dredging riverbeds by hand and never once slept under his own roof. A South American civilization that built its entire religion, economy, and food supply around water and still lost that gamble completely. And the genuinely unsettling reality that the deadliest natural disaster ever recorded in human history wasn't a war, a plague, or an earthquake. It was rain, arriving exactly on schedule and then simply refusing to stop. Let's start with the most basic problem this kind of rain creates, because it isn't actually the flooding itself that makes a river like this so dangerous. It's the geography funneling everything into one place at once. Water falling across an entire mountain range, sometimes hundreds of miles apart, has nowhere to go except downward into the same narrowing channel, arriving all at once with nowhere left to spread out. This is the Yellow River's entire history in miniature. Over 3,000 years, it changed its course roughly 1,500 times, once every 2 years on average, like clockwork, except the clock was killing people. Ancient texts don't even call it a river, they call it China's sorrow. In 1887, it broke its banks and killed somewhere between 900,000 and 2 million people in a matter of days. In 1931, it happened again, joined this time by the Yangtze and the Huai rivers flooding simultaneously, and the death toll climbed as high as 4 million. Very likely the single deadliest natural disaster ever documented in recorded human history. Not an earthquake, not a volcano, rain funneled downhill, generation after generation, century after century, disaster after disaster. Here's where the story shifts from simple catastrophe to something considerably stranger. Chinese legend claims this exact horror traces all the way back to the very birth of Chinese civilization itself, and for over a century, historians dismissed it as pure invention. The legend describes a flood so severe it lasted 2 full generations. Survivors abandoned their homes for high ground, building nests in trees just to survive each night. A leader named Gun tried blocking the water with dams and failed so completely it cost him his life. His son, Yu, tried something radically different. Instead of fighting the water, he dug channels and simply guided it toward the sea. 13 years of relentless labor. He is said to have passed his own front door 3 separate times during that decade and never once walked through it, not even when his infant son called out his father's name for the very first time. When Yu finally succeeded, he didn't just save his people. He founded China's first dynasty and became the template for what a great leader was supposed to look like for the next 4,000 years of Chinese history. For 2,500 years, everyone assumed the story was myth and nothing more. Then in 2016, researchers found sediment evidence at a site called Jishi Gorge, showing an earthquake had triggered a landslide dam almost 3,900 years ago in precisely the location the legend describes. The story wasn't invention, it was memory, carried by word of mouth for 2,000 years before anyone ever wrote it down. But rain didn't drown just one civilization on one continent. On the other side of the planet, it did something even crueler, in reverse order. Along the desert coast of northern Peru, the Moche built an entire society around water they never fully controlled. Their farmland depended completely on canals carrying Andean snowmelt, engineered for one very specific, dependable rhythm of rainfall. Then, around 560 CE, that rhythm shattered. Ice cores drilled from Andean glaciers reveal what scientists now call a mega El Nino, arriving in the cruelest possible sequence. First, 30 straight years of drought so severe it dried out the very canals their food supply depended on. Then, with no warning and no time to recover, 30 years of the exact opposite, catastrophic rain and flooding that buried entire farming valleys under sand layers 2 meters thick. Archaeologists have found evidence the Moche turned to human sacrifice during this stretch, a desperate attempt to convince their gods to restore a balance the climate had already permanently broken. It never worked. Within a few generations, 600 years of Moche civilization simply came apart at the seams. Pulling all of this together, the picture that emerges isn't the clean story you might expect. Predictable rain doesn't just build civilizations, and unpredictable rain doesn't just destroy them. It's messier than that and considerably more unsettling. The Yellow River fed China for thousands of years and murdered millions of its people in a single season, sometimes within the same century. The Moche spent 600 years building their art, architecture, and entire religion around water, and the water simply changed its mind without asking permission. Rain never picked a side in any of it. It was never the villain, and it was never fully the ally either. It was the one variable every ancient civilization on Earth was forced to build its entire existence around, fully aware that the same river feeding their children this year could just as easily be the one erasing them the next, with no warning of which version was arriving until the water was already rising past their door. And this pattern hasn't stopped. It simply changed which names show up in the headlines. In the summer of 2022, extreme monsoon rainfall submerged nearly one-third of Pakistan in a matter of weeks, displacing around 7 million people in Sindh province alone. In Bangladesh, atmospheric river events dumping rain into the Bay of Bengal have quadrupled in frequency over the past 70 years, turning what was once a predictable seasonal rhythm into something closer to a gamble every single year. The tools have changed completely. Satellites track storms days before they arrive. Concrete dams hold back rivers that once ran wild. Early warning systems can move millions of people before a single drop falls. And yet the fundamental equation you the Great faced 4,000 years ago, and the one the Moche lost their entire civilization to, hasn't actually changed at all. Somewhere right now, rain is falling on a mountain range. Nobody downstream is watching, quietly deciding drop by drop whether it arrives as the harvest that feeds a family for another year, or the flood that erases them from the record entirely. Ancient humans never solved that problem. They only ever learned to live inside it, one uncertain season at a time.